Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight. Um, Caelen McQuilkin is a graduate of the Levining High School and Amherst College, where she majored in English and American Studies. She was born and raised in Levining and has always been inspired by the community and the story sharing in this place. She's followed this interest by working as a reporter for the Mammoth Times, the Amherst Student, the student-run newspaper at her college, and The Current, a local newspaper in Savannah, Georgia. Caelen began her senior thesis project last January with the goal of engaging with community and conversation even more. In Levining and beyond, Caelen enjoys long conversations, spending time outdoors, playing basketball, and finding new places to love. We look forward very much to what she has to tell us. She has a couple of colleagues who are going to be with us, but they will be introduced during the rest of the presentation. So Caelen, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Hi everyone. It's so awesome to see so many names and so many people on here. Um, yeah, I'm so excited to be here and give a little presentation, some about my senior thesis. So, um, yeah, I can just tell you that, yeah, that's the intro of me. I'm here to share some about my project, which was based on interviews with a bunch of people from the town of Levining, the Mono Basin area. Um, and the kind of overall goal of my thesis, I would say, was to hear people's stories and engage with them and try to find ways to share more of them. So that's part of why, like, I'm really excited to be here with everyone and especially to be with Andrea and Janice, who were two of people who I interviewed in the thesis and are here to also share some of those stories. Um, so yeah, I will start the presentation now, and then we can go on to the next intros if that sounds good. Okay. I do think Janice maybe is still not on the call. I tried giving her a phone call earlier, like a few minutes ago. So I don't know if anyone has any other ideas before we like fully start everything, or if we should just go ahead.
You can just go ahead, Caelen.
Okay, okay, sounds good. Um, okay, awesome. Yeah, Dre, do you want to go with the your intro and then we can just start from there?
Yeah. Hello everyone. I'm Andrea Santillan. I also graduated from Levining High School a couple years ago, and I'm currently an undergrad student at Caelen McQuilkin College. I was born and raised in Levining. I've lived there my whole life, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how my family got here and what it was like for me growing up in Levining. And yeah.
So yeah, to kind of start, I just wanted to share a little bit with everyone about what like inspired me to do this project and why I became interested in it. And I thought that maybe the best way to sort of try to explain that would be to tell a story from my life. Um, and so yeah, I think just for me, like living my whole life in Lee Vining and growing up here, stories have always felt like a really important part of this place. And it just kind of they felt like this string that kind of helps weave people's lives together and has helped me understand other people and more about their different experiences in this place. And I have many memories of things like sitting on like the red benches in front of the market or working at Lottie Da or being in the SUV on our long drives when we would go to Baker or Trona to play sports there, and how so many of those memories were about the stories that we would tell each other while we were doing these things. Because it was about like the words that we shared with each other, and the place came to feel very linked to the stories that we would share. And so in many cases, I think that they could help people understand the differences in our lives. Like in high school, some of our parents had immigrated to the United States and Levining from Mexico. Others people's parents had come to the place to work in environmental organizations. Other people could look at their family's roots going back to time immemorial in this place. And people had very different relationships to the town, but I think the stories could help us understand both the ways that we shared the place and what we had in common, but also these big differences and the different ways we experienced it. And I think that the older I got, the more that I started to think some about how everyone understood and had different stories in this place, and that even though we did share things like the benches outside the market or like our high school gym, there were also such a wide range of stories and feelings for different people in those places. And I think that in many ways, because of the privileges I've had in my life when I was younger, I felt like Lee Vining kind of was this exception to like racism or economic inequality that you saw in big cities or other places. But I think as I got older, I started to hear more of people's different stories from this place and kind of see things differently and learn some really impactful stories. And I think one of those things was learning more about the history of the Mono Basin and the ranchers and gold miners who came to this area and how they tried to force indigenous Kuzetica people off their lands and like change and erase their ways of life. And even though, yeah, today like we can see that this wasn't something that was successful, but it was violent and like an important history to look at in understanding how this place is today. I think another impactful story that I've like heard, or not even just one story, but like many experiences of like the tourism industry and jobs in this place, and how the town runs so much on restaurants and hotels and these industries that sustain tourism, but how oftentimes the pay and working conditions in those jobs isn't fair at all. And so just hearing more about that, and even just kind of on like a smaller scale, that people understood a small community differently. And while it could be this really closely knit and supporting and welcoming place, sometimes at the same time it could also be lonely or difficult. And so I feel like these are all some stories that have impacted me just like growing up here, and learning about them for other people. And then at the same time as all of this, growing up in this place meant so many really amazing things about love and community and trust with other people. And I have memories of like reading books in English class and hearing classmates ask questions that made me think about the world in like a completely different way. Or like how proud I felt to go to the high school when we would run out of the locker room and get ready for our basketball games, whether we won or lost in the end. Um, and there's just so many important things in this town, like learning how to share in that kindergarten classroom, learning how to be like a good neighbor to the people around you. And so basically, I felt like there were so many different stories and experiences, and some were really bad and some were really good, for to put it in really broad terms. And I just started to realize that to be like a better community member and to try to be a better friend, I should write and talk about all of those things and be specific about thinking about the racial and economic inequality in this place and how they shape it. And also looking at like what makes it really unique and really amazing and how it could become better too. So in my senior thesis project, I kind of wanted to explore all of those different ideas. And I've always felt like writing and talking to people have been two ways that really can encapsulate that complexity of like love and hate for a place, or strengths and problems. And it was in conversations with other people always that I felt like I could feel that complexity and like hear other people describing it. And so when from the beginning of my time in college on the East Coast, I knew that I wanted to write about Lee Vining. I went to school in Massachusetts, and while I've come to really love it there, it was also so different from what I was used to. And there was so much that I missed about Lee Vining. And I felt like even though the world oftentimes might not look towards a small rural town as a particularly like inspiring place or anything like that, I realized like that's not true. Like there's so much that people can learn from hearing about people's lives here. And so for my project, my goal was to kind of turn back towards these stories and share them both among people in the community first, but also for other people that were interested too. So I interviewed 42 people who have had like some connection to the area in their lives, many of whom still live here now. And I asked people questions about their lives and experiences. And I kept them pretty open-ended. Like some of the questions I asked were things like, can you tell me the story of how you ended up living here? Or can you tell me a story of times that people have helped you or you've helped them? Um, and it was awesome because I got to talk to people who I'd known my whole life and also people that I had never really spoken to before. It was a wide range, and I always found myself learning things about people's lives that I had never known, like no matter how well I knew them or not. And it just felt very valuable to have a time to like show curiosity to other people and hear what they had to say because it never was like fully what I expected. Um, so here, this slide up here right now is the sections that I ended up using to organize the stories in the end. By the time that I was done with all the interviews, there were like, it was over like 40 hours of recorded conversations. And when I transcribed all of it, it came up to like over 300 pages. Like it was just crazy. There was so much. And so I was like, what am I going to do with it? And my sister Ellery actually is the person that had a really amazing idea when we were talking. And she said, I feel like so much of the way that we experience this place has to do with specific locations. And she was like, why don't you organize the thesis based on that? And I realized reading through everything that it really was true. Like a lot of stories ended up being about the high school, for example, or like monocone, these different sort of themes or locations. And that was something bigger I kind of wanted to talk about too, is just in my process of doing this thesis, I thought a lot about how my own story was part of it. And I knew from the beginning that there was no way that I could write this as if I was like a neutral observer or like that I could find some conclusion about levining that was scientific or anything like that, because it's my home and everyone that I was talking to is people that I know and things. So I knew I would be part of it, but at the same time, I wanted to think about how I could let people's stories sort of like stand on their own at the same time. I didn't want to take other people's words and just use them to make my own point or just fold it into my own writing. And so I thought about how to like be really honest about me being part of the thesis, but also letting the stories speak for themselves as much as possible. And so I think using this organization in the end was helpful because it didn't mean that I didn't write anything in between the stories. I just had them all here. So you can see that these different sections, some of them are not like physical locations, some of them are bigger themes. But yeah, this was how I ended up organizing the section that had all the interviews in it. And yeah, so I wanted to say thank you to everyone who I interviewed. These are all the people that I felt so lucky to get to talk to. And I think my reflection on this is just that in every single conversation I had with all these people, the stories like inspired me. They reminded me why I love this place so much. And they showed me, I think, that not only is it possible, but it's necessary to look at the history of a place in a critical way and try to tell really honest and complete stories about it. And especially think about how race and class affect those stories. And I think like this is something that we'll always be working on doing. I don't think that my thesis necessarily did that perfectly or anything, but I think that's an important thing to try and think about in this place. And so it's just something that I wanted to start at trying in this thesis, I would say. So yeah, those are kind of just some of my thoughts, and there will be time for like questions at the end, but my final thing on this is just that I think this project was as much about my story as it was about other people's. And so I'm really excited to be here with Janice and Andrea. I hope Janice is on the call now, but she maybe had something come up. Um, and so yeah, now that the presentation is going to transition into some of the stories that are part of the thesis. Oh, and I should mention too, anyone who's interested, I would love for you to read it. I can email a PDF, and also there's now hard copies that's available at the Historical Society and at all the local libraries. So it's hard. I feel like I can't put the stories into words as well as the people that actually lived them and told them. And so that's where there's going to be more actual detail of the stories, but also in this presentation now. So yeah, I'll move to the next slide if Janice is on here.
The old 395 house is where my grandma and grandpa, Frank and Betsy Sam, lived. The question is, how did they come to live in Levining? Back in the early 1900s, the United States Cavalry was rounding up Indian people from the Owens Valley area and herding them south to Bakersfield to be put in a concentration camp. My grandma and great-grandmother were part of the roundup. They escaped in the middle of the night somewhere near the dry lake area by Lone Pine. They would travel at night and hide in the daytime. They had no food, so they would eat grasses, roots, and small rodents, only hunting at night, afraid to make fire for fear of being caught. It took many days to make their way back north. They settled in the Bishop area for a little while. Many Indians were still hiding in the Long Valley area, so they kept moving north. This is the area where my grandma and grandpa met. They decided to keep moving north and finally reached Levining. That's when they decided to make a home there. Luckily for the Indians, the cavalry was ended in 1942 by Congress. My grandpa worked in the area and eventually acquired the 2 acres of land from a Farrington rancher. This is where they built the 2 houses. They had 3 boys and 4 girls who all attended school in Levining. Eventually, they grew up and moved away to start families of their own. As children, we would always go to Levining to stay for the summer. We gathered pine nuts, piaga, acorn, and other foods. The fishing was great and hunting was too. Grandpa made a cold room to store dried meats and other foods. There was 2 wood stoves in the house, one for cooking and one for heating. My grandma would bake amazing Indian pan bread, cakes, and other baked goods. Breakfast was always my favorite meal. Grandpa would fry potatoes, bacon, and eggs. It was so delicious. I really do miss that. In the daytime, we had chores like chopping and stacking wood, cleaning house, the everyday chores we still do. Certain times of the year, we would go out to gather our traditional foods. During pine nut season, all of us would camp out for a week. The kids would climb the trees to knock the green cones down to the ground. Everyone would pick them up and put them in baskets. By the afternoon, an area would be cleared out to make a bonfire with sagebrush. We did this because sagebrush burns really hot and is really the best way to cook the pine nut in the cone. After all the cones were tossed into the fire, the sagebrush had burned down, we would take shovels and turn the soil. This process allowed the coals to continue cooking the pine nuts underground. After a few hours, it was cool enough to dig up the pine cones. We would all sit and open the cones to get the cooked pine nuts out. They would be put in containers to be taken home and stored for winter. These were the most delicious pine nuts one could eat. The flavor is absolutely amazing. Another part of the year, we would go on another camp out to gather piaga. These are the Pandora moth caterpillars that would crawl down the big pine trees. The men would dig trenches around the base of the trees the night before. The next morning, the kids would take the buckets to scoop up caterpillars. The men were back in camp digging a pit. The pit is what the caterpillars would be dumped in and cooked with sagebrush. Like the pine nuts, the piaga was stirred the same way. After a few hours, the piaga would be dug up and rinsed. The area we gather in is all volcanic sand, so the food would have to be rinsed very well. Again, these cooked piaga was placed in containers to be stored for winter. Of course, hunting and fishing was a huge component of our livelihood. We dried a lot of our meats. As we all know, the winters were long and rough, so planning our food supply was very important. The 395 house had no electricity. We used kerosene lanterns, so bedtime came early. Grandpa had devised a water line that ran from Parker Creek to the house. He even made his own water filter. Running water was essential to keep us and everything going. In the afternoons, we would sit on the front porch, watch the cars drive by, and listen to a transistor radio. Remember those days? Those were the ultimate quiet times and so serene. After I graduated high school, I lived with Grandpa and Grandma. I got a job at the shrimp factory. For most people, it was a way of life to earn money and help out. The most memorable time for me was the 4th of July. Everyone would jump into the back of the pickup and off to town we would go. Our first stop was Laver's Market. Grandpa would buy a loaf of bread, a roasted chicken, chips, and soda pop. Then we would drive to the end of town and make a left turn up the hill. He had the perfect spot to watch fireworks. We took out our chairs and blankets and ate our dinner. It was so exciting as we waited for it to get dark. and the anticipation of the fireworks about to begin. The first big boom started the show. We sat in awe watching the beautiful colors exploding into the night sky. Everyone was applauding, honking their horns, and yelling their oohs and ahs. I could see cars lined up along 395 to watch the amazing sight. These fireworks always stuck with me. It was these wonderful times I got to cherish and share with my family. This is why Levining is the most beautiful place to live. There were so many amazing things to do there and remember. Thank you.
And then, yeah, now I think, Andrea, do you want to start your section now?
As I mentioned before, I'm Andrea Santillan. I've been living in Levining my whole life until recently when I moved away for college. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American here at Levining. My family is originally from a small town in Jalisco, Mexico. And this surprised a lot of people or like coming into Levining or like the tourists. But Levining has a pretty large Hispanic community and it has a pretty big presence in the town. The first person to come to Levining from my family was my dad. He was only 17 years old when he embarked on his journey to come to the United States. And he first ended up in South Carolina working at a ranch, but he didn't really like it. And the East Coast was just way too different for him than his sunny little town in Mexico. So he had I believe it was an uncle in Levining who had been there for a couple years. I'm not sure how he got to Levining. I've been meaning to ask, but I haven't got into that. But he was the one who told my dad to go over to Levining, that it was this great small little town, a tight-knit community, and to get away from the city, that's a very nice, calm place to stay. So my dad went over to Levining. I believe he was 18. He had just turned 18 when he moved into Levining. And when he first got there, he started working at a cafe. I think it was called the Yosemite something, I forgot. But he started working there. He started working lots of hours. He would work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then he had a second job where he would work from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. And this would be happening day after day. And while he was working there at the restaurant and I believe he was working at a hotel, it was very hard for him, especially with language. And he looked very young, so a lot of people would just undermine him and his abilities, especially once they saw that he couldn't speak English. So he had a lot of hardships with learning the language, and also he received a lot of microaggressions from tourists. He didn't know at the time there were microaggressions. He would just kind of smile and laugh it off. And I think now going back and like talking to me about it, I would tell him like, oh no, it's not okay what they were telling you, or like it's I don't know, that's an offensive thing for someone to say. And it really just got me thinking about how many other immigrant families went through that when they first got there, or like anybody who works in this service industry, how people from outside don't really know about this community and how ignorant they can really be. But nonetheless, my dad persevered, and he eventually brought all of his siblings over to Levining as well. And 3 of his youngest siblings actually also graduated from Levining High School. And so yeah, Levining has been a really big part of our family. And now my family has a pretty big presence here in Levining. So a lot of people know the Santillan family. And mostly, I think me growing up here personally, what has impacted me and my family the most has been the school. The school really has helped me grow to who I am, and just so many memories I have there, especially right now there's a picture of basketball. I think basketball was a really big thing here in Levining, and I feel like it still is. Not only for the students, it's a way to go out and play and like going on the trips, but it's also just for the community. Whenever there's a home game, the thing I always remember is at the end of the game. Like despite whether we lost or we won, the end of the game was always something very memorable for me. I feel like it was a place for the community to come out on a winter day where days seem slow and people just come out and support Levining. And I always have this image of like us just being on the court shooting balls and just everybody catching up. And I think that's the memory I take away a lot. I feel like especially after the Big Pine games where sometimes we would take a DJ and we would be selling Ohana's food. It was just, I think that's one of my most cherished moments at Levining at the high school. But yeah, besides sports, the just learning in Levining is such a different experience. Especially with our trips to Yosemite and Mono Lake. Like we have two of the most beautiful places in California right in our backyard. And I really like how it's incorporated into our education. Especially the Yosemite trip, I think that's something everybody looks forward to. It's that one time a year, it's the beginning of the year, and where people and like all the students really connect, where the seniors start to become really good friends with the freshmen. And it's really where that bond is formed every single generation, every single year. A memory in particular I have about the Yosemite trip was one time we were around the bonfires. The bonfires are always the most fun part. At the end of the day, we just sit down, tell stories, talk about our day and our activities throughout the day. And I remember this one moment when I think it was the freshmen were there, and there was this one freshman, and he was very shy. He seemed very to himself. But we turned on some music and he started dancing. He just got up and started dancing in front of the campfire. And everybody just stood there and looked at him. He looked so happy dancing. And then everybody started cheering him on. And then more people started dancing. Some teachers jumped in as well. And it's just, I just sat there. And now that I'm in college, I think, and I'm like, not a lot of people experience that. This is something unique to Levining. And it's something that I'm sure everybody at the high school cherishes. The Yosemite trip. It's what everybody talks about. It's that place where students are kind of introduced to the special bond that happens at Levining High School. And I think it's truly a unique experience, you know, having the small classes. You get to know your classmates, many of them who you've been with since elementary school. I think that's a really big thing where it's not a lot of people experience that. And I think that's truly what makes Levining High, Levining schools very unique. Another thing I really take away from growing up in Levining is also how involved we are with Mono Lake and how involved it is with our curriculum. I think it's funny because you could ask any student from Levining to tell you something about Mono Lake, and every single kid that goes to Levining schools from kindergarten to 12th grade can tell you all these facts about Mono Lake. They can tell you the history of Mono Lake. They can tell you how it's this ancient saline lake, the story between the water rights in Los Angeles and Mono Lake. I think it's this shared experience, this shared knowledge that I think is very unique and cool to have, and how every student in Levining takes that away with them. And I think it's really cool that we get to incorporate all these natural landmarks into our education, and it's something I take with me everywhere. I think growing up in Levining has been a really great experience. My favorite question to answer every time is when people ask me, where are you from? And it's always fun just trying to figure out how to explain where I'm from, or like saying, oh, I'm near Yosemite, I'm near Mammoth. And once every 10 times, somebody will know about Levining, and that just makes me so happy. I just think Levining is really a unique place to grow up. There's some ups and downs of living there, but at the same time, I feel like I am where I'm at because of Levining. You know, there's this saying in Spanish that says, small town, big opportunities. And I think that's really true of Levining. I really don't think I would be where I am if it wasn't for the tight-knit community of Levining, the teachers, and just being somewhere where everybody's so connected and being nurtured into a person that can believe in themselves and believes that they can go out and do more. And yeah, I think I will always cherish all my memories in Levining, and I always look forward to going back no matter where I am. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I think I kind of we wanted to just kind of like end the presentation. I guess one thing that I'm thinking about now is just that I don't think this project has ever come to any kind of conclusion. Like even in my writing, when I turned it in, I put conclusion in quotation marks because there are so many people and so many stories that didn't get written down in my thesis. And there's so many people on this call who I never got the chance to talk to that I would love to, and so many other people as well. And so I didn't want my thesis to come across as if it was trying to like tell like the story of Levining, but instead I wanted it to be something that would help people think about the power of stories in this place, and to think about some of the stories here, some that have been significant in people's lives. And then to wonder of like, what else is there? What else do I like, am I curious about in my neighbors' lives? Or if it's someone not from Levining, you know, for them to wonder like, what else has happened in this place? And so yeah, I just hope that the thesis can be something that like prompts more storytelling and more sharing and more connection, because truly just in my life, I think that has been one of the most meaningful things that I've gotten to experience, kind of like what Andrea was saying. And so I hope that this presentation is a little part of that process, and just, yeah, that like it can help everyone think about like the community care that makes this place really special. So this is my email if anyone wants to contact me later. And then also we can answer any questions. I'm gonna leave this last slide up. It's a little tree that I made with like quotes and words from all the interviews in the thesis. Um, and yeah, so I guess we can kind of move into like a Q&A thing now.
Caelen, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. Andrea, also really appreciated what you had to say there. I'm kind of lucky. I've been able to see your thesis, Caelen, and also the zine version, the hard copy, and fascinating reading. I spent hours looking at it the other day, and I think Ellen is now looking at it today. So great presentation, guys. Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions, and I see Dave Carl has his hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I coming through now? Okay. Caelen or Duncan, could you hold up the two documents that you produced so that the camera can see them, and just show people that what we mean when they say, you can read it online, but you have these two booklets basically. Is that possible? Do you have them there that you could?
I will go and fetch mine. You guys carry on.
Okay, I just and just while I'm on, thank you very much. It is like as Duncan said, for someone who's lived in Levining, it was really special to read this and see what you came up with.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad. Yeah, so the book that Duncan is holding up right now, that's the booklet version. It's in English and Spanish. It has a lot of photos in it, and that's sort of the like sharing version. And then that copy is like the full copy that had sort of more of a like an introduction and conclusion, and that was what I submitted to my college. And then both of those things are in the libraries and historical society. So
And very well annotated and referenced for the many citations that are very relevant to anybody living in Lee Vining or the Mona Basin. Yeah. Really great.
Caelen, this is Rich Foy. Do you want to read questions from chat?
yeah, that sounds good. I don't know if I open them, is it gonna share with the screen with everyone? I don't know how this works.
No, it'll be off to the side, or at least it should be off to the side.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Okay, so I see the first question here is, what is the class size in Lee Vining High School? Another question that I love answering. We can both answer. So for me, yeah, I graduated with 5 other people. It was a total of 6. Yeah, some of us, me and one other person in the class, had been there since preschool together. We had known each other our whole lives. Many of the people in the class we had known each other since like 4th grade or something. And then we had one student who came later in high school, and we were very close. And you know, it's interesting, like not all of us have stayed in really close touch since then, but I feel like the times that we shared in high school were really special because we were such a small class.
Yeah, I think my experience was kind of not the opposite, but it was a little different. My class was considered big. We were considered a bigger class, and we were like an anomaly in Levining High. My class had 16 students, and but it was still the same thing. We were all pretty close to each other. The moment we came in as freshmen, we really I feel like we all overran the school. Like we just changed everything because I don't know. It actually a larger class size really impacted the school. But overall, I think it's the same experience, and kind of like how Kale said, like we're not that connected as much anymore, but every time we see each other over the summer or break, it's always fun to revisit memories.
It feels like one of those things where you know you shared some really important moments in your life together, and like you're always gonna have that no matter how close you stay after, kind of.
There's another thing in the chat. Adjusting to college is always a challenge, right? How would you two say that leaving helped or hindered your new life at university? And do you have any examples to give?
Yeah, I can start. I think it definitely, I totally agree. It was a hard transition for sure. Like
This is the McQuilkins
very
children.
different.
She's the granddaughter of the Gertmanians.
Um, sorry, I think someone maybe
It's okay. So, yeah, carry on.
just keep going. Okay, cool. So I went to a small college on the East Coast, Amherst College. It was nice that it wasn't a huge college because I think that made the transition easier for sure. Um, but there, kind of like Andrea was saying before, there's just so many things that I always thought was normal that it turned out no one else really shared that experience. And sometimes it led to really funny stories. Like one random example is that when we were in elementary school, these like traveling opera singers would always come to our school and they would help us do like plays and like sing and stuff, and it was this really cool program. And I don't know why, but I just assumed like, oh, that's how it is for everyone in elementary school. They have these like things go on. And so one day it just came up and I like mentioned it. My friends were like, what? Like you had opera singers come to your school? And I was like, oh yeah, we did. And I don't know how much that has to do with us being a small school, but there was just things like that, where oftentimes it was funny. But I think also like it being from Lee Vining, I felt like I became more thankful for it once I was gone in a weird way because I realized what made it unique in some ways. And I felt like there was like an openness and care towards other people that I didn't see as the norm in my college. And even though I feel so lucky that I've found like amazing friends and people that do have that, that wasn't like expected of you, you know what I mean? And so I feel like it was hard for me at first to like try to find that community, but then I feel like in a way Lee Vining kind of helped inspire me to try to like build it with more people around me.
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything Kale said. It's just those are my favorite questions. Like, oh, like how is it going to a small school, or how is that possible, or that must have been weird. But I feel like to me it wasn't weird going to a small school. If anything, it was really nice. It really helped me grow out, branch out. When I first got into high school, I was very shy. I wouldn't speak up as much, but I think it's a great place to grow and branch out. And I guess the only thing I would say kind of hindered, I wouldn't say hindered. I feel like like Kale said, I take a lot of my values from Lee Vining into college. I think one thing is just experience-wise. I feel like a lot of students who are from the city go into college with an internship working for this organization or doing this or that. I feel like in Lee Vining there aren't really those opportunities because it's just rural, but I mean, I still got to get a really good work ethic from working in an industry job or like a hospitality industry job, which is something a lot of people don't really have in college. So it is a different experience, and there are some things where you feel like you're not experienced enough, or I don't know, just being in the city in general and having to be more aware of your surroundings or like different things. But there are little things that I adjusted to very quickly. I also feel it's just because how Kel said, like that this feeling of going back home and having that like knowing that you can go back home and there's people caring for you and there's people that believe in you really helps keep moving forward.
There's a couple more questions that are very similar. Caelen, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and what are your plans once you graduate?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for whoever asked that for being interested. So
Yeah, that's
I
Rebecca
graduated this.
Watkins and Sharon Bloom.
Oh, hey guys. Um, yeah, well, so I graduated in December, so I'm kind of just like now getting adjusted to being graduated, which is crazy. And I don't, yeah, right now I'm in New York City. I'm living with one of my friends from college, so I'm kind of in like the opposite place right now, but I'm liking it, and I'm gonna be working at a school here for the spring, because I think I'm interested like in education, but I think the main thing that I've thought about as a job is journalism. Like I've really loved the experience of interviewing people and writing stories. And I feel like a lot of what I talked about in this presentation is kind of why I'm interested in journalism too. So I applied for some jobs in newspapers all around the country. And like I tried to look for newspapers in places where there's not a lot of news coverage or there's topics that don't get a lot of news coverage. And yeah, because I think that's something I care about a lot. But to be honest, I genuinely don't really know. That's kind of all I have right now. But I just, yeah, like I guess I could just say like I hope to be in a place where I can find a really close community and feel like I'm like making a difference in the world.
Thanks, Caelen. And Andrea, would you like to chime in on your hopes of the future?
Yeah, well, I'm currently in Washington, D.C., seeking an internship, and I think I'm hoping to going into like the public service industry kind of. I don't know. I want to go to law school after graduating, but not right away. I want to take a gap year, enter the workforce, and just kind of see what that's like. Um, and then I definitely want to go into law school. I know it's a very hard and long process, but I think it's something I aspire to go do more. I guess that's kind of like my plan right now. I'm not really too sure, but that's kind of my end goal right now. Just graduate, go into the workforce, see what that's like, and then apply to law school.
Thanks, Andrea. Steve Moore says, did any of your interviewees have recollections or connections with Bodhi?
Yeah, nobody did who or at least that got brought up in the interview. But that's a really interesting question. I would be curious to hear more about that I'm sure there are many people that do, but it never came up in the interviews.
Okay, I have a similar follow-up to that, and that is, do you have any ideas for following on from this thesis project? There's a lot more in Leavining that's going on, and Mono City come to that. Any ideas for a follow-on project?
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely so many things that would be cool. And like I was saying, yeah, I know that there's like so many stories that aren't in this book at all. So like on one level, I just think it would be cool to continue doing the interviews with people and like transcribing them and stuff. But one thing I've thought about is that I know that the Leavining Library has actually like interview recording equipment and stuff there, and so does the Mammoth Library. And so I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, I think it would be really cool to like maybe connect it to the library and have like there's a place where people could just literally go in any day and record a story on their own. But I was talking to Beth about it, the librarian, and she was saying like sometimes it's kind of hard to like spread the word about that, or maybe sometimes people aren't just going to choose to randomly go do that on their own. So maybe there needs to be some kind of like day where everyone go, like an event or something like that. I think something like that could be really interesting where people could record them and we could have the audio recordings, because that was something else I thought about too. Was I did record all the interviews, but it was only so that I could get the transcription. But doing something with audio, I feel like could be really interesting too. So yeah, but if people have ideas as well, I would love to hear like what people think about it.
May I say something? This is
Carry on,
Jill.
Jill. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you realize what an unbelievable high school that you have. A couple of years ago, I live in a town where the high school has 600 students, and it's mostly academic children that are going to the school at the Claremont colleges. So the town of Claremont has 7 different institutions, and their children go to high school here. Okay, so Leavining has a very small high school, and one year, one student went to Stanford, one to Berkeley, one to Amherst or Williams, and one to Claremont McKenna College. And you know, for a high school, now Andrea is one of our students. I love seeing you, honey. But no matter what, Andrea is an example of a family that she's definitely first gen. She's fit in so wonderfully. Something is in the water or in the air that makes this high school unique, I think, among any high school in America. And Sergio's here too.
Thanks, Jill. Caelen, there's another question just come up from Dawn Cameron. Was there a common theme throughout the interviews that may have inspired a new project or curiosity worth researching and reporting on?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I think I sort of feel like any of the sections that I showed you guys on that list that I ended up using could become like its own thesis project because I think it would be really interesting, for example, to just ask a ton of people about their stories from like the Mono Market or their stories about Mono Lake or just something like that. So I feel like totally, and I also think it could be really interesting to ask people about this past winter and like their experiences with that just because it was such a like unprecedented event that I feel like kind of in a similar way to what we were talking about earlier is like it was like this shared experience, but I also think people had their own really unique stories with it. And I think it would be interesting. Yeah. So I honestly, there wasn't one thing that I left being like, oh, I need to know more about this one theme. But I definitely do think there could be a lot of specific themes that emerged that there's so many more stories about.
Yeah, for sure. I know reading your zine and the thesis, you spent a lot of time sheltering from the snow while you were transcribing, then going out and shoveling and coming back and doing more work on it. There was talk in Mono City about some kind of collective project to document last winter before all those images and memories dissipate through our aging brains. So that would be a great area to focus on by somebody, if not yourself, by some other group. Yeah, for sure. Okay, any other questions?
I have, let's see, I'm not back on camera. I don't know how I get myself back. Don't worry about it. This is Dave. I know that at least one of the people who from the high school who has worked at the museum, the History Museum, the last couple of summers, talked some in the book about that experience. And I just want to mention it again that it's a great thing that's happening, that we've had 3 students involved in the History Museum operation in the summer when they're available to come over and be part of the, dealing with all of the history questions and and the operation of the museum. So that's, if that brings us back to the Historical Society here is to wrap things up. It's some of that's in this book, in Caelen's book too.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, again, Andrea and Caelen, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your presentation tonight. It was really fascinating. And I know, yeah, we had like 49 people on at one time, which is great. I mean, you engendered a lot of interest in the community with your work about Leavining. So final reminder, next month on March 4th, our meeting will be again via Zoom. And it will be Elaine Bond, author of the new children's book, The Pupfish Hero, about Phil Pister's pupfish history. And I'm looking forward to seeing that one. So if there are any final comments from officers or trustees? No, in that case, thank you very much, everybody. Good night. And again, Andrea and Caelen, that was just great. Thank you very much. Okay, good
Thank you
night.
so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.